There it is. Cracking the can right as we go live. You know what I need to do? I need to stop doing is probably a better way to put it. I need to stop looking at Twitter right before we start a podcast. Because Twitter, I mean, set aside the whole, anonymity lets people say awful things to people they'll never have to actually face in person or have any kind of, accountability for what they say. Set aside that whole part. There's just too much on Twitter. It's overwhelming sometimes with the things you find on there. And I'm not even talking about the things that are entertaining, just the depressing news and, just Twitter. It's Twitter. And I always make the mistake. I'm, just clicking around the web, but just getting ready to start the podcast, waiting that last minute or two to hit, start the stream, to hit go live. And inevitably I look at Twitter, and I shouldn't. I should not look at Twitter because it's just, it's Twitter. Welcome to the Panther-Lair Show, though. We are live here on Tuesday night, December 8th, 2020. Appreciate everyone who's trickling in to the live chat on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, we release the podcast later in the week. We appreciate everyone who listens to the podcast. And if you listen to the podcast and find that you wish you had an opportunity to interact, you find yourself having a reaction to something I say or comment or a question on something we talk about, I mean, you can always go to the message boards or go to Twitter and talk about it later after we post the podcast. But the best way to do it is to get online and get live with us at 8:30 on every Tuesday night for the live Panther-Lair Show at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's all one word, Panther-Lair.com. youtube.com/Panther-Lair was taken, apparently. I never looked it up to see who it was. Probably some Carolina Panthers podcast or video channel on YouTube. Or maybe like a live camera trained in the wild on a family of Panthers. But anyway, our channel is youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Pantherlaircom, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's where we talk every Tuesday night, live at 8:30. Do it for about an hour, and we just talk about Pitt sports. And we're in that really sweet spot right now where there's a lot going on. There's football, there's basketball, and recruiting. I think if you've listened to this podcast before, you listen to the Panthers Insider Show on Saturday mornings on 93.7 The Fan that we do. I mean, if you hear me talk about the website, I always say it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. I say football, basketball, and recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. I say that all the time. I'm sure I'll say it here tonight during this podcast. Well, this really is that time of year when all three of those things are really going on. And that makes it extra fun because we really have a lot of things that we can talk about. Pitt football, playing Georgia Tech on Wednesday night. Pitt basketball playing Northwestern on Wednesday night. Recruiting, National Letter of Intent signing day coming up next Wednesday. So really over the course of the next week, you get the whole thing. You get the whole enchilada, as Dr. Wayne Dyer used to say on those PBS specials, the telethons that I would watch. You get the whole thing. You get football, basketball, and recruiting all right here in this next week, and that gives us plenty to talk about on tonight's Panther-Lair Show, and of course on subsequent Panther-Lair shows. Got to give or next week's Panther-Lair Show. We'll do a full-blown recruiting preview, but we got some recruiting stuff to talk about here tonight as well. Always got to give a quick shout out to homefieldapparel.com. I've got the warm-up, the Victory Lights shirt on tonight. They support the podcast. You got to go check them out. If you like Pitt shirts and you're coming up on the holiday season, if you have friends, family, fellow Pitt fans that are always on the lookout for something unique, something high quality to wear, some different kind of Pitt garb, this is the place to go. Homefieldapparel.com. You want to go check them out. I always say, there's two angles to really good shirts. There's the quality of the material, the fabric itself, and then the design, the logo, not logo, but the design they come up with. And Home Field really knocks it out of the park on both fronts. Their shirts are super soft. I had the sweatshirt on earlier, that my Hawaii Rainbow Warriors sweatshirt. I love wearing that thing. It's so soft. It's so comfortable. I wore it all day today. It was just really comfortable around the house. And then the t-shirts are super soft as well. And then they have the great designs. I mean, you can see this is how can I get onto the camera there? Yeah, you see that sweet warm up the Victory Lights. You can see the Pitt helmet there, kind of a classic look, almost a retro type of look. I mean, it's high quality stuff. And, and like I say, really unique designs that I think they're really trying to tap into the history of the schools, some of the mythology of the schools and they have a lot of schools. Pitt is not the only one, but they definitely have a great Pitt collection. So go to homefieldapparel.com. They support the podcast. They support Panther-Lair.com. We appreciate them, and we endorse them because they make great products. I mean, they really do. These shirts are fantastic. So go check it out, homefieldapparel.com. Gifts for you, gifts for your friends and family who are Pitt fans or fans of whatever school. I mean, they have a lot of schools there. You're going to find some really great stuff, I think, if you poke around on their website a little bit, homefieldapparel.com. Got a beer tonight, hazy IPA from Arx. We're working through these. We're almost out, and so that's a problem. I'm going to have to find a way to re-up on those. But hopefully you got something cold that you're enjoying here on a Tuesday night. As we move through the week, heading up to the final game of the regular season for the Pitt football team, and I guess we'll start there. I want to talk basketball, I want to talk recruiting, but we'll start with the Pitt football team. You know, they're going to Georgia Tech on Thursday night. Regular season finale. Panthers, of course, they're 5-5. They want to get to 6-5 for whatever that's worth. They want to close the season on a win for whatever that's worth. This season is hard, you know, and I think I've really been thinking about this a lot this week of how difficult this season has been. I mean, look, I don't want to focus too much on college football players and college football coaches because this fall, the summer, the spring, this year has been hard on everyone. It's been hard on a lot of people. There's no question about it. But I think if we keep our focus on, if we just focus on the things that we always talk about, which is Pitt football, right, and Pitt basketball and Pitt recruiting, this has been a hard season. I asked Pat Narduzzi that on Monday during his weekly press conference. I asked him, just with everything you guys have had to do on a week-to-week basis just to get to Saturday, never mind game planning and practice and preparation, just to get the game actually played, the things you've had to do, the due diligence you've had to do, the protocols you've had to follow, and just that nagging worry at all times, I would think, that the game is going to be canceled. You never know when that game is going to be, pulled out from under you. I mean, Clemson had it happen to them the morning of a game. Pitt had it happen to them Thursday before a game with the Georgia Tech game. You never know when it's going to be taken away, either by your fault or someone else's. And just I would say the hoops they've had to jump through on a weekly basis, but I don't want to sort of speak derisively about it because I think they've done what's necessary, and I think the ACC has had a good, plan in place. And kudos to them for getting the games played that they've gotten played. But I asked Pat Narduzzi, just with the things you've had to do just to get to game day, has this been the most challenging season of your career professionally? And he didn't hesitate. And I didn't know what he was going to say. That's sort of a question of extremes. Saying, out of your entire 30-year career of coaching or whatever it's been, is this the hardest year, the most challenging year you've had? I think some coaches could say, I don't know. It's certainly had its challenges, but there are challenges every year. You could get a lot of coaches speak out of it, but Pat Narduzzi didn't hesitate. He said, absolutely, without a doubt. Never had a year like this before. Obviously, he's never had a year like this before, but I think he's never had a year this challenging before. And for these coaches, for these players, for the administrative guys, administrative people, I should say, the staffers, everyone around the program, everyone whose falls, they revolve around Saturdays and playing football games and practicing football and playing football and watching film and doing all those things that we associate with the football program. And a giant wrench thrown into the gears this year, making it incredibly more difficult to just accomplish that goal that, they all used to work so hard and still do work so hard on game planning and preparation and scouting and evaluations and all those things. And then they had this whole other responsibility cast upon them, this whole other duty cast upon them of really day-to-day, 24-hour day, 7-day a week diligence, and which I think can get exhausting. We talk about COVID fatigue, and I think that means different things to different people. Probably depending on what your experience has been, you've probably experienced some level of it in some iteration, and I think a lot of people have different iterations of it. you know, but I think there is some real fatigue for these student athletes and these coaches. And I think that's not just unique to Pitt. I think it applies probably across the country. And I think it applies in the NFL as well. And, I'm saying this on Tuesday night, the day after the Steelers had a pretty put in a pretty lackluster effort in a loss to Washington. But I think this stuff wears you down, and you get to December, you're 4 months into this. I think it wears you down. And I think, and I don't have Pitt's players on, I do have, I shouldn't say I don't have them on speed dial. We don't really talk about speed dial anymore, right? You have contacts. And yeah, sure, I have Pitt players in my contacts because I talked to them all when they were recruits. But, they're not calling me and telling me, hey, man, we're worn out by this. But I think they probably are. I think they probably are. And I think they're probably looking forward to having this season come to an end. I think they're probably looking forward to playing this final game and then maybe being done with football for 2020 and moving on, which obviously brings up the interesting question of a bowl game and whether or not Pitt would go to a bowl game. I mean, Pat Narduzzi was asked that question on Monday and said, I believe so. That would be my intention. But I mean, it's going to be awfully tricky, I would think, to pull that off. You've got a whole bunch of different factors that are going to come into play here. Not the least of which is we don't know how many bowl games there are even going to be. I mean, you've already had a couple ACC tied-in bowl games cancel. I think the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit, I think that one might have canceled. I know the Pinstripe Bowl did. The Sun Bowl did. Those are multiple ACC spots that are no longer available. And so even in this year, when there are no bowl eligibility requirements, no win requirements, a 6-5 Pitt team might get squeezed out of the ACC bowl spots. And maybe you fill an at-large spot if there aren't enough teams to fill the spots that are available. But I wonder how many bowl games are actually going to take place outside of your New Year's Six and your college football playoffs. Now we're coming up closer. I mean, we're into the second week of December already. So, some of these decisions are going to have to be made if they're going to be made. But the other complicating factor here is the ACC championship game isn't until December 19th. There's 11 days until the ACC championship game. And that makes things really tricky because it's only a few days later when bowls start happening. And because the ACC championship game is that day, and because Clemson's got the one loss already, the ACC championship game is going to have a direct impact on what the makeup of the playoffs are and what the bowl lineup is going to be. Because if Notre Dame wins, then Clemson's not going to go to the ACC championship game. They're going to go to the Orange Bowl. But if Clemson wins, it seems pretty likely that both Clemson and Notre Dame are going to be in the college football playoffs, in which case you're going to have an extra spot in the ACC bowl lineup. I don't know, because of the trickle-down nature of the bowl selection process, I don't know how many of those lower-tier ACC bowls are really going to jump at the opportunity to make a selection before December 19th. I mean, the Orange Bowl is definitely not going to extend an invite prior to December 19th. And then everything sort of filters off of that. If the Orange Bowl does, say Clemson wins and then Clemson and Notre Dame both go to the college football playoffs, the Orange Bowl probably takes North Carolina or Miami or somebody. Well, the other team goes to whatever the next one is, Charlotte or someplace. But all those things get shifted down. So I think it's going to be tricky because you're going to end up with teams getting invited to bowls on the 19th or maybe the 20th at the latest. And then they're going to be going and playing in those games a week later or less. I mean, how are you scouting for an opponent? I mean, I guess teams get a sense of where they might end up so they can start a little bit of scouting work and prep work. If you could put all of these coaches and all of these players, and I'm not just talking about Pitt, I'm talking about the majority of the ACC, maybe the majority of college football, outside of those teams that are going to be playing in New Year's Six bowls and playing in the college football playoffs, if you could put all these coaches and players on some sort of truth serum, I have to think that a significant percentage of them would say, we don't want to play in a bowl game. I mean, there's no fun in the experience. You're not going to have an experience like you would have. I mean, historically, typically when you go to a bowl game, you go for a whole week. You're down there, the week before the game. You stay until the night after the game or the day after the game. You fly back, and you go around the town. You do different visits and tours, and it's a whole experience. You practice there for a week. It's a whole big thing. Even in Birmingham, they had stuff to do every day. The team had events. They went bowling night and Civil Rights Museum night and all this different stuff. El Paso was full of adventure. But this year, you're not going to these places for a week. You're not going to go spend a week in Charlotte. You're not going to go spend a week in Boca Raton or Nashville or someplace. It's not happening. You're going to fly in the day before, and you're going to fly out right after the game, just like you would do for any road game. So, there's no benefit in the experience. And do you really want to go through the process of playing another game and everything that leads up to it? All those things we talked about earlier about the week-to-week, day-to-day diligence just to make the game happen. Now, if it works out that Pickett's invited to a bowl and they accept that, I'm sure they'll, I would guess they would go. If they were being honest, I would guess that they would not want to go. I don't know that. They haven't told me. Pitt coaches aren't consulting me about this. I could be completely off base about it. But I think there are a lot of people who are probably ready for the season to be over. Now, this game on Thursday night, this is a regular season game. This is the finale. I do think they would like to go out on a high note, and I think Georgia Tech should provide the perfect opportunity to do so. I think we talked, whenever that was, a month or two ago, we talked about Georgia Tech not being very good. They're not. It's still a rebuilding process there for Jeff Collins after taking over Paul Johnson's program and having to really turn it around completely. Not necessarily from a success standpoint, but from the way the program had been built and obviously what they did on offense. You're doing a 180 and doing something completely different. They have some talented players. I think Jeff Collins has done a decent job recruiting, but he's got a ways to go before he's going to turn that thing around. And they're not there yet. They're not there this season. And they're particularly not good on defense. And it's funny because, Pitt was supposed to play Georgia Tech the week after the Florida State game. And, Florida State was not good defensively. You looked at their stats. They were one of the worst teams in the ACC by the numbers defensively. And you came out of that game, and then you look ahead to the next week, you say, Georgia Tech, wow, they actually might be worse defensively by the numbers than Florida State. And their offense is not very good either. Really, their strength is still in running the ball. They've got a quarterback who can move around a little bit in Jeff Sims, but their strength is in running the ball. And that's what Pitt is good at doing. They're good at stopping the run. As much as we want to, pick at that part of their defense and their defensive emphasis and focus, they are good at stopping the run. And this is a game they should win. I think I saw that Pitt opened as a 6.5-point favorite at Georgia Tech, which sounds about right to me. This game should look like the Florida State and Virginia Tech games. And really, if you had put it in the middle of those two games, it would have been a pretty nice 3-game stretch where Pitt probably could have, won 3 games in a row, scoring 40 and giving up, 20 or less. So, I think I think that it's a game, like I say, it's a game Pitt should win. It's and they should be able to finish on a high note. Now, there's rumors about who's going to be playing and who's going to be sitting out, and Rashad Weaver, Patrick Jones, Damar Hamlin. These guys are getting rumored to potentially not play. Nothing's official yet. I'm guessing it won't be official until we get to the game time. That's going to make things a little more complicated, but I still think that you're going to have the weapons offensively. You're still going to have a lot of good players on defense. Even if you don't have Weaver and Jones, you're still going to it's going to be a little dicey at defensive end because you're going to be going with Deslin Alexandra and John Morgan, potentially Habakkuk Baldonado. Maybe Deon Hayes gets some run in this game if you don't have the two seniors. That's going to change the equation a little bit. You still got all your linebackers. I'm intrigued by a safety duo of Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett, and you'll still have your corners out there. And then, like I say, on offense, you're going to have you should have Kenny Pickett. You should have those offensive linemen. You should have all the offensive linemen who missed the last 2 games. Those guys should be back, although, we could probably debate who should actually be lining up out there. And you'll have guys like Jordan Addison and Jalen Barton and DJ Turner and Taysir Mack and Shockey Jacques-Louis and Trey Tipton. I mean, you'll have your receivers, plus a couple of your running backs. We'll see who's actually available. Even if they're missing some personnel, they should be able to take care of Georgia Tech and finish the season on something of a high note, at least. Finish it with a win, you know what I mean, and finish with a winning record on a season that, I'm not sure we're ready to really. What's the right word? Put a value on this season just yet. I mean, it's been such a season unlike any other. I'm not sure we're ready to sit back and say that was good or that was bad. I mean, I think it's ultimately a disappointment because of the losses to Boston College and NC State. If you've listened to this podcast, I've said that a million times. You can't take away blowout losses to Notre Dame and Clemson. Those things happen. You can't COVID explain those losses away. You can't COVID explain a 6-5 season away. There's going to be a fair amount of pressure on Pat Narduzzi for 2021, and there should be. It's understandable. But there's so much context on this season. There's so many complicating factors on this season that it's hard to sit back and say, well, it's just like any other year and it should be judged as such. But I feel like as we sit here on December 8th, we're not in the right position to make those judgments just yet. So that's it. It's a tricky situation. I'll be curious to see. I'll be curious to see where we come down on this season when we look in the rearview mirror. Let's get a couple questions here. Let's get a couple comments and questions from some people chiming in here in the live stream. Anthony Tennyson starting it off first. Tony says, I hope Patrick Jones plays so he can dominate one last game. Patrick Jones has been great to watch. It's been fun to see him develop. He came to Pitt as a 2-star recruit. I know we can say what we want about the recruiting rankings and things. I mean, as a 2-star recruit, and I think I understand why he was a 2-star prospect. He had a pretty solid offer sheet, but he was not who he is now. You know what I mean? His level of play has gone up considerably. And even when he first started getting on the field those first couple years, I mean, I remember Patrick Jones, 2017, 2018, having an issue with penalties, face mask penalties, roughing the passer type of things. He got ejected, I think, from the Virginia game in 2018, I want to say. I think that was him. And what I kept saying to people is, yes, he keeps getting into the, he keeps getting these penalties, and it's unfortunate, and it's not, it's not what you want to have. You don't want to cost your team 15 yards and automatic first downs and get yourself kicked out of the game. But he was also getting into the backfield. You couldn't get a face mask on the quarterback if you're not getting into the backfield. Guys who face mask the quarterback in the backfield, they're getting penetration. And I said, I'm not looking for the silver lining of this dark cloud of this penalty problem that Patrick Jones seems to have, but I'm going to say he's showing some potential here. And sure enough, I think he's grown into it. And last year, he really had a breakout season playing, largely, taking over the spot that was vacated by Rashad Weaver. I mean, Rashad Weaver was supposed to be the man last year. And Patrick Jones steps in and really kind of takes the lead on that, at that defensive end role. And, played really well. And so I wondered about both guys, honestly, coming into this season. I mean, I wondered about Rashad Weaver coming back off an ACL injury. How was he going to be? Was he, because I know guys come back from ACL injuries, but you just never know. You just never know if a guy is going to be back to where he was before the injury or not. And the other thing with Rashad Weaver is I think he had 6.5 sacks 2 years ago, 2018, the last season he played. And 2019 was such an important year for him. I mean, that needed to be his breakout season where he really took it up a level and became a dominant force off the edge. And because I hadn't seen that from him yet, And because he had this injury, I wondered what he was going to be in 2020. I didn't know if he was going to play. I didn't know if he was going to outplay Jones. And I think you can make a pretty good case that he has. I mean, he's been outstanding. He had a great season this year. And then the same thing goes for Patrick Jones. I mean, he was a guy who, I think stepped up when Weaver went down last year and had a really good season in 2019. But I wondered, how's he going to build on it? Can he finish 2020 strong? And if you talked, to Pitt coaches and people around the program last offseason, they would tell you in 2019 they felt like Patrick Jones was their best defensive player. And that's on a defense that included Jalen Twyman getting 10.5 sacks and Paris Ford, playing as well as he did. And they would probably tell you that they felt like Patrick Jones was their best defensive player last season. So I said, well, that's pretty impressive. Let's see what he does this year where him and Weaver are together and, can he build on it? And sure enough, he has. I mean, he's been outstanding. And I think both of those guys, Jones and Weaver, are going to play in the NFL and play, probably for a long time, I would think, and have productive careers and get drafted relatively high. I don't know where they're going to get drafted. I think some of that's going to come down to testing. I think that's always a big factor. But they're going to get drafted, I would guess, in the first 3 rounds and probably have pretty good careers. I mean, those guys are pretty close to the prototypes of what you want to have in those big 4-3 defensive ends. RJC Man 38 jumping in as a super chatter. We always appreciate you. He's doing always supporting the podcast with the super chat contribution. And if you want to make sure your question or comment gets read during the show, you can be a super chatter as well. RJC Man 38 says, if Pitt has 3 first-round draft picks this year, what benefits will Pitt enjoy? Does this move the needle on Narduzzi? So the draft pick question is an interesting one. I don't know if they're going to have 3 first-round draft picks. I guess the 3 that you're suggesting are Patrick Jones, Jalen Twyman, and Rashad Weaver. I don't know if they're all going to go in the first round. I don't know if any of them are going to go in the first round. I think a lot of it will come down to testing. I mean, I don't think Aaron Donald was a first-round draft pick prior to the NFL Combine his year. I don't think Darrelle Revis was a first-round draft pick prior to his workout at Pitt's Pro Day. I think he was hurt. I don't think he went to the Combine his year. But if those guys get drafted, say 1 in the first round, 1 in the second, 1 in the third, or 1 in the first round, 2 in the second, or 1 in the first round, 2 in the third, or somewhere around. If all 3 of those guys go in the top 3 rounds, or if you even get at least 1 into the first round, what's the impact? Like you said, does it move the needle on Pat Narduzzi? What are the benefits that Pitt will enjoy? And the truth is, in my experience, I think it does a few things. I think it does a few things for you. One, it allows you to pump those guys and use those guys as an image for your football program and your university for as long as they're relevant. You know what I mean? You can say, we've had this many first-round draft picks. You can make a lot of cool Twitter graphics and send a lot of cool pamphlets and graphics and designs to recruits saying, we had these first-round draft picks. That's how good we are. And every time those guys do something good in a game, you can pump it up, just like they do with Aaron Donald right now. That's a benefit. You also have the benefit of these kids, high school kids. I mean, we're talking about recruiting, right? I mean, when we're talking about what the possible benefit or impact is going to be, you're talking about on recruiting. The impact it has on recruiting, and when the recruits, the high school kids, watch the draft and they see a Pitt player taken in the first round or a Pitt player taken in the second round or 3 guys in the first 3 rounds, that helps you because it makes Pitt prominent in their minds. And if you've listened to my podcast before, if you've heard me talk about recruiting before, one of the most important things you can do in recruiting, maybe the most important thing you can do in recruiting, is keep yourself prominent in a recruit's mind. You have to build strong relationships. You need on-field success and atmosphere and all those things. But the great recruiters, the guys who really separate themselves, are the ones who form that connection and then keep their school prominent in the recruit's mind it's through hard work. There's no easy way to do that. You have to work hard, and you have to continue to make sure they're thinking about Pitt. Now, you get a bunch of guys drafted in the first 3 rounds. That helps with sort of your name recognition, your brand recognition. It's going to help kids think about, hey, Pitt is a school that puts guys in the NFL. Now, the flip side of that and this is just from my experience over the last 15 years, it doesn't really move the needle all that much. It helps keep you relevant. It helps keep you prominent in the minds of recruits because your school is out there and getting talked about. It doesn't ultimately, it's not going to get you that many more commitments. It's definitely not going to win you any games. Does it move the needle with the alums and the boosters and the donors? I mean, you'd have to ask them. I'd probably not. I mean, if Pitt has 3 first-round draft picks this year, right? And next year, let's say everything gets back to normal in 2021, 68,500 can be at every game at Heinz Field. And Pitt has 3 first-round draft picks. Oh, let's make it 4, all right? Let's say Paris Ford goes too. And I'm guessing he's not going to be a first-round draft pick. But let's just say 4 of the first 32 picks in the NFL draft are Pitt players. Do you really think you're going to see a bump in attendance as a result of that? No, probably not. Does it, RJC Man 38's other question, does it get Narduzzi, does it lengthen his leash a little bit? Does it buy him an extra year or something like that? No, probably not, because, you have all these talented players and you went 6-5. I'm not saying it gets held against you, but I don't think it's something that is going to get you a contract extension because you've got a bunch of guys in the NFL. I think it does reflect well on the individual coaches. I think a guy like Charlie Partridge can recruit the heck out of the defensive linemen in the next couple of years and point to Patrick Jones and point to Jalen Twyman and point to Rashad Weaver, just like he points to J.J. Watt. I think you can absolutely do that. If Jordan Addison continues to have success, if he gets drafted in the NFL, Chris Beatty can tout that. I think you absolutely can do those kinds of things. But in terms of big movement, in terms of big impact, I don't think it has as much impact as you think it does. And the last thing I would say about that is sometimes we hear people say that, if I was a recruit, I would want to go to the school that's going to get me to the NFL. And I get that. And a lot of times Pitt fans will bring that up and say that in comparison to if they're arguing with Penn State fans. I want to go to the school that's going to get me to the NFL. The thing is, you're not thinking like a 5-star recruit. Most 5-star recruits, most 4-star recruits, a lot of recruits in general, believe they're already going to the NFL. They believe they're talented enough to get to the NFL. And I don't think they make their decisions based on that factor as much as we like to think they do. Now, I don't think they decide based on who's going to get me to the NFL, because I think they believe they have the God-given talent to do it, regardless of who's coaching them. That's just sort of my take on it. And so that's why kids do end up picking a school more based on campus life, game day atmosphere, sort of prominence of the program, big-time games they're playing in, before they think about, can this school get me to the NFL? I think they believe they can get themselves to the NFL. Pitfan 234, could Deon Hayes start next year? He seems to be really good. He certainly does seem to be really good, and I think he is really good. Could he start next year? It'll be interesting to see. I mean, you've got Habakkuk Baldonado coming back. You've got John Morgan coming back. You've got Deslin Alexandra coming back, who could potentially, I don't know. He goes back and forth between defensive end and defensive tackle, but he's going to be a redshirt senior in 2021. So you've got some guys coming back. But, I mean, Deon Hayes, he hasn't gotten a lot of snaps this season, but when he's been out there, he's made an impact. Almost every snap. I mean, he has been really, really good. I think it's, if he doesn't start next season, I think he plays a lot. You know what I mean? As a redshirt freshman, top reserve defensive end, I think he's going to get on the field a lot. Deon Hayes is going to be really good. He is an outstanding player. And I think he's shown it in his limited opportunities that he's gotten this year. Bobby Fitzmaurice asks about Derveron Maxwell Black, linebacker prospect out of the St. Petersburg area in Florida, decommitted from Pitt. I guess it was on Monday, actually, Monday night. Decommitted from Pitt. He asked, did that decommitment have anything to do with the Pitt coaches getting Naquan Brown and the Pitt coaches pulling Maxwell Black's offer? Oh, yeah. So it's Tuesday. And we haven't talked since last Tuesday here on the Panther-Lair Show, which means we haven't talked about Pitt getting a commitment from Naquan Brown, a defensive end / outside linebacker, probably going to be a defensive end at Pitt, who decommitted from LSU late last week and then committed to Pitt on Friday. He's a 4-star prospect out of the state of Virginia, another guy out of the Tidewater area, another one for Chris Beatty, another notch in his belt. Now 4 recruits in this class for Beatty, just out of that southern Virginia, Tidewater, Norfolk, Hampton area, Virginia Beach area. And Brown's really good. Brown's interesting because there's some people who I think who have looked at him and said, I don't know if he's fast enough to play linebacker or big enough to be a defensive end. He's about 6'2.5", 205, somewhere around there. And I kind of get that. I don't know. I'm not so sure either. I'm not so sure if he's fast enough to play linebacker, and I think he'll probably end up as a defensive end, which means they're going to need to bulk him up. They're going to need to add some serious size to Naquan Brown before he can really make an impact in the ACC. But the thing about Naquan Brown, though, is when you watch his film, all right, he might be 6'2.5", 205 pounds, but he makes plays. He's all over the field making plays. Physical, explosive. He gets off the line. He gets past the blockers. He gets into the backfield. He makes plays on offense. They got him catching touchdown passes in triple coverage and stuff like that. He's just a playmaker. And I think you look at how he moves on the field, the kind of impact he makes, and I think it outweighs the measurables a little bit to some extent. And so Pitt, I think, was pretty happy to get him after he decommitted from LSU. He committed to LSU over the summer, and I think Pitt felt like they were still going to have a chance at the end of the recruiting process to make another run at Naquan Brown. Chris Beatty obviously kept the contact up there. Brown is also teammates with Miles Alston, the wide receiver who's committed to Pitt. So that was a big get for the Panthers. But like I said, I think he's going to be a defensive end at Pitt. So then he wouldn't really have anything to do with Derveron Maxwell Black's decommitment because Black is a linebacker. So it's not really, or Maxwell Black is a linebacker. It's not really a matter of squeezing numbers at a certain position. As far as Maxwell Black decommitting, coming off the commitment list, I think probably, you could say something along the lines that it was something of a mutual parting of ways. I think the Pitt coaches decided to move on in this situation. It's unfortunate when that kind of thing happens this close to signing day, 8-9 days before signing day. Fortunately, there is another signing day in February, so it's not quite as close to quite as close to the deadline as it would be in other years, or prior to the bringing in the December signing day a few years ago. It's unfortunate when it happens, though. You don't like to see a school kind of walk away from a recruit who has been committed since the summer, but it appears to be the case in this situation. For whatever reason, Pitt decided to back off of Maxwell Black. And I don't think it's connected to Naquan Brown. I don't think it's connected to a scholarship crunch. I think it's connected probably more to a bit of a reevaluation. And it does open up a scholarship they can use somewhere else, either on another recruit or a transfer or something like that. This is actually Pitt fan 234 asks about, can you see Pitt adding any transfers to start on defense next year? Also, a new offensive coordinator probably means an increased chance of a new transfer quarterback, correct? Defensively, I don't think you ever rule anything out. I think if you're Pitt, you're always keeping an eye out for a defensive player who could come in and make an impact, an experienced guy who can maybe come in for 1 year and start. Spots where they could potentially use one. You can really go anywhere on the defense. I don't think there's anywhere that they're so deep that, with talented, experienced players that they couldn't use a good transfer addition. I think, Pitt has good depth on defense and they have good talent on defense, but I think they could always use another guy out there who's got experience to help. But I don't know if there's one position that jumps out that, boy, they really got to emphasize it. Maybe safety, depending on how they feel about Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett. I guess corner, although they should have Damari Mathis back next season. And then, you got a lot of reps this year for Marquez Williams and got a lot of reps this year for AJ Woods. Got some work this year for Rashad Battle. If they can bring in Khalil Anderson in the recruiting class, I think he'll have a chance to play, and maybe even start early. I think the Pitt coaches are that high on him. Linebacker, you're going to have Cam Bright back. You're going to have Servassier Dennis back. You'll get Wendell Davis back from his injury. And then you've got some really talented younger players to serve as the backups to those guys. Probably a defensive lineman, maybe. Although, I think they've restocked those 4 spots pretty well. Offensively, I think you're always on the lookout for a transfer quarterback, regardless of whether or not your offensive coordinator changes, particularly when you're going to go from a 3-year starter to breaking in a new starter. Eventually, you're going to have to break in a new starter, but if you get an opportunity to land a good transfer quarterback, you probably could use it this year. Just because I don't know if they know what they have in Davis Bevel and Joey Yellen and Nick Patty just yet. With Kenny Pickett leaving, you're going to be you're going to be looking for a new starter next year anyway. And next year's a pretty crucial year for Pat Narduzzi. So you probably, if you can get a good transfer quarterback, you probably should try to. But I don't know, would a new offensive coordinator increase or decrease the likelihood? I guess it would probably increase it a little bit depending on where he's coming from and the connections he's got and who he's recruited in the past. But yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what comes available. There's a lot of guys out there, and then what Pitt decides to do. Coaster King says, thoughts on playing West Virginia instead of a bowl game? I've seen some suggestions about this. West Virginia fan, I think, asked the question initially of whether Pitt and West Virginia should just skip a bowl game and just play against each other. You don't even need a hotel stay. You just drive down the road or up the road, depending on where you play the game. You could go down to Morgantown and play the game. You won't have any conflicts with Steeler games or anything like that. I think you'd have to get a special sort of dispensation, or not dispensation, but you'd have to get a special exception from the conference because the ACC said you play one non-conference game. This wouldn't really be a bowl game, but kind of would. But I don't know. Like I said, I think that would be fun. I don't know. I don't know how much the players and coaches would really want to do it, though. Like I say, I can imagine them. I can imagine them being ready to call it a day on this season. Matt Sable kind of follows that up. Is it even worth going to a bowl game this year? Shouldn't they just play this last game and move on? RJ Seaman 38 replies that you need the practices, so you play in the bowl so you can get that practice time. Yeah, that's always sort of the thing coaches have always said. You get extra practices. It's not just 15 practices. People often say that. You really can practice from the end of the season up until the bowl game. So however many practices you can fit in. Now, tricky thing this year is you might end up with December 19th ACC title game and just a couple days of practice before your bowl game. I don't know if Pitt would intend on practicing between the Georgia Tech game and the ACC championship game, just because they don't know if they're going to a bowl or not. But I do. I mean, like I said, I just keep coming back to this feeling that maybe it'd just be better to move on here. You should have spring camp. I would imagine they'll have spring practices. Just work then. I mean, just move on. Let's see here. Scrolling through the questions here. Dale Gribble says, is Pitt and a team like Penn State or West Virginia going to have to agree to play each other to get invited to a bowl game to make it exciting? I don't know. Maybe that would help, I guess. You still have bowl tie-ins. I'm not really sure. I'd have to look again and see what kind of tie-ins there are as far as the ACC and the Big Ten. I mean, obviously the Pinstripe Bowl was one, but that got canceled. I don't know about the ACC and the Big 12. You could see bowl games going away from the tie-ins altogether just because of how unique this season is. So I can imagine that. But I don't know. I think that would make it more appealing, but you're obviously not going to sell any more tickets because I guess if a bowl game's played in Florida, they could potentially have fans there, so you get some ticket money out of it. But I don't think you're going to sell a lot of tickets, even if you have, even if you're allowed to have 15,000 or 16,000, I don't know if you're going to sell that many tickets to even a Pitt West Virginia game or something like that, or a Pitt Penn State game. I just don't know if enough people are going to want to travel to that kind of thing, to stay in the hotel and fly. I don't think there's a lot of money to be made in the bowl games this year, outside of TV advertising, which is I guess where a lot of the money is anyway. But I mean, I think you'll have a lot of people staying home to watch the games, so you should have pretty good audiences, and maybe a Pitt West Virginia draws a big audience. Maybe Pitt Penn State draws a big audience. I don't know. 2/10 speed and agility. Our guy Dwayne Brown checking in. Good to see you. 2/10. Always appreciate the best in the business chiming in here. Said they never should have broke up the Big East football conference. Yeah, I mean, that's an old argument. It depends on how far back you want to go. I mean, you want to go back to the Big East the way it was in 2010 with UConn, South Florida, Cincinnati, Louisville, Rutgers, Pitt, and West Virginia? Or do you want to scroll back a little bit further to like 2003 when you saw Boston College and Virginia Tech and Miami in the conference to go with Pitt and Rutgers and West Virginia and Syracuse and Temple? I mean, I would like to see a conference that's sort of a combination. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the Northeastern schools, your Pitt, your Boston College, Syracuse, Rutgers, Penn State, Maryland. I mean, there's a great conference you could make, or an interesting conference you could make out of sort of Northeast down to like, no further south than Maryland, no further west than Morgantown, I guess. I don't know actually on the latitude there which one's further south, but I mean you can make a really good conference there. The old Big East was great in basketball. It was okay in football, and it was petering out at the end. It was becoming less and less interesting at the end in 2010 and 2011. It wasn't very good. 2012, there was a time when it was really fun in football, and then it kind of went downhill. Basketball was always good. Anthony Tennyson says, do you think the basketball team will go 500? This is an interesting question. They're going to play 25 games. So I guess no. I guess they won't go 500. They will either be above 500 or below 500. Is that copping out on your question, Tony? I think I predicted, we did our preseason picks at Panther-Lair.com, and I think I predicted before the season that I thought Pitt would go 14-11. But that was based on them going 5-0 in the non-conference, and then 9-11 in the ACC, which 9-11 in the ACC would be an improvement, a step closer to that 500 record in the in the conference games. But again, it was predicated on them going, 14-11 was based on them going 5-0, and they lost to St. Francis. So 4-1 is the best they're going to do. They're going to have Northwestern on Wednesday night. Not a great team, but definitely a team that can present a few challenges, certainly with some of their outside shooters. They've got some big forwards who can step out and make a couple threes if those guys get hot. And with Pitt's, sometimes, sometimes lackluster defense, they might have some opportunities to get hot from outside. And if that happens, that's going to be a really tough game. But I still think Pitt can win the game, maybe should win the game, even though they're going to be traveling. That's going to have some challenges in it as well. But going 500 on the season, can they go 13-12? They can. I guess I predicted 14-11 with a 5-0 non-conference record. If they go 4-1 in the non-conference and then go 9-11, like I was predicting, in the ACC, then you're looking at a 13-12 record. I'm not so sure how confident I am about 9-11 in the ACC. I like 9-11 as a record, as an improvement from the previous two seasons, but I'm not entirely sure that they're going to pull it off. It might be, another 8-12 or something along those lines, and then that's going to draw that 500 into question. I guess this is all a long way of saying I don't know right now. I think there are some real question marks that need to come into focus. I think they need to figure out the center position a little bit better than they have. I think we need to see what you're really going to get out of these freshmen. You need Ithiel Horton to settle into some kind of consistent role. If he could look like he did against Northern Illinois, then yeah, that's going to boost their chances quite a bit. You know, if some of these freshmen, if William Jeffers and Femi Odikali can be a little more consistent, can be a little more solid, then yeah, that's going to boost their chances. If Nike Sabande gets ruled eligible, that's going to help them as well. And as long as, key guys like Xavier Johnson and Justin Champagny and Audis Tony stay healthy, then yeah, they got a real good shot. They got a real shot at going 13-12 or 14-11. But, if any of those factors don't go in Pitt's favor, then it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. Let's scroll down here. John K. says Pitt will play Navy in the Military Bowl. That's a possibility. The Military Bowl in Annapolis, that's a short trip. It's easy to get there, easy to get back. That's a game that could be potentially out there, although Joe Giglio, or Giglio, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I apologize to him, but he's really good at covering the bowl picture for the ACC every year. He's got really good reporting. I saw, I think on Monday, he put out a list of bowl projections for the ACC, and he had Boston College in the Military Bowl against Navy, pretty much regardless of whether Clemson or Notre Dame win the ACC championship game. It seems like a lot hinges on that, but I think a lot of the bowl picture hinges on that game, but he seemed to believe that Boston College was sort of locked in for Annapolis, so we'll see about that. John K. also says that going to a bowl game is a reward for having a winning season. Right, but I think this year there's not much reward in it. Usually the reward is, you go to a bowl game, you spend a whole week somewhere else, living in a hotel and practicing somewhere new and seeing a different city and getting a whole experience. I don't think there'd be much of an experience this year. Nobody's told me that. I shouldn't just assume it, but it seems unlikely that they're going to go spend a week traipsing around Annapolis checking out the Naval Academy. You know what I mean? Or in Boca Raton or wherever it is that they end up. It seems like there's not much of a reward. It's just a game that, wouldn't exactly have the same allure of wouldn't have the same allure of a typical bowl game. Let's see here. Scrolling through. Oh, yeah, John K. reminds me that we actually did do a podcast about Naquan Brown. Last Friday night, we had a special recruiting reaction podcast. Hopefully you got a chance to check that out. I thought we didn't talk about Naquan Brown committing at all. But, yeah, that's right. We did. We fired up the live stream Dream Machine at like 8:30, 9 o'clock on Friday night, somewhere around there, and we did talk about it. That's a good point. This class coming together, signing day in a week, really. It's on December 16th, next Wednesday, and Pitt, as of Tuesday night, number 19 recruiting class in the country. They got 22 commitments. I think that number will shift a little bit. I'm not sure if they'll add anybody else before signing day. The real one to watch is Khalil Anderson. He's a cornerback prospect out of Atlanta. And really, I think if you talk to some people at Pitt, different sources I've talked to, they think Anderson might be their best commitment in the class, which is really saying something. I think we at Rivals.com, we've got him underrated a little bit as a 3-star cornerback prospect. Ole Miss and Miami both offered him this fall. Georgia was kind of poking around, talking to him, showing some interest. They hadn't offered yet. Clemson doing the same thing. I think Georgia's going to back off because they just got a commitment from a 4-star cornerback today on Tuesday. So that should fill their spot. But you're going to keep an eye on Clemson, though, because if Clemson makes a move and decides to offer Khalil Anderson, that's going to make it pretty tough for Pitt. I think the goal for Pitt right now is to make sure he signs on Wednesday. I think if Anderson signs on Wednesday, he will sign with Pitt. If he decides to hold off and sign in February at the sort of old signing day, then I don't know if that bodes well for Pitt's chances. So that's kind of the thing to watch. It was sort of last year there was some mystery around Jordan Addison. I think he didn't even sign on signing day. I think he signed the next day. He was out of town or visiting family or this or that. But it's it's a little bit of the same situation. Although Jordan Addison took an official visit, like right before signing day, Khalil Anderson is not having that opportunity because nobody can take any visits. But he's really the guy to watch. He's the big name to keep an eye on. Everybody, more or less, everybody else in the class seems pretty solid. We've confirmed with almost all the guys in the class that they're going to be signing on signing day. And, you can check Panther-Lair.com to see that list of the guys we've confirmed with who we are confident that Pitt is going to sign on signing day. And then you just, keep an eye for any loose ends over the next week. I don't know if they'll add anybody else to the class before next Wednesday. My gut says they'll hold on to the guys they want, see what happens with Khalil Anderson. And then once they get on the other side of signing day, sit down, reevaluate their recruiting board and reassess their targets and decide how they want to move forward. I think they're going to go after a few transfer candidates, and then they'll probably try and get one or two recruits in January, which is more or less what they've done over the past few years since they started, being 2 signing days. So, I think the class is more or less set as it is. Now, we could wake up tomorrow morning and Pitt could get a new commitment, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, I guess not. I could see, they could potentially throw out a new offer to a guy, sort of a late grab to see who could, to try and throw someone extra into the class now, because I think they've got space to take a large class. And with 22 commitments, you've got room for a few more. But, we'll see kind of how that pans out. You got to stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for that. Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the website. You should know that website by now. By the way, it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards where you can interact with other Pitt fans 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, literally all hours of the day, every day of the week. There are Pitt fans on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports. Thursday night, when we're all sitting around trying to figure out how to watch the Pitt-Georgia Tech game, we will be online on the Panther-Lair.com message boards talking about it. I mean, you are probably like me. You like to watch sports and talk to other people about the sports as you're watching them. And you don't have a lot of opportunities to do that right now. There's not a lot of sports bars you can go to and watch these games. If you live in Pittsburgh or in, Pennsylvania, you don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. Well, here's the next best thing. You can get a beer, you can sit and watch the game on your TV, and you can keep the Panther-Lair.com message boards open and interact with other Pitt fans there and have those conversations with the fans there. And so you can have a lot of fun that way. And then, of course, you can talk a lot before the game, talk a lot after the game. We have lots of post-game breakdowns and analysis. Is the best place to be if you're a Pitt fan. Panther-Lair.com. And I talk about what's going on Thursday night. We're going to be doing the same thing on Wednesday night when Pitt plays Northwestern and every other basketball game throughout the season. And signing day is going to be full of activity and action on the message boards and on Panther-Lair.com. So there's a lot going on. Panther-Lair.com. You need to go check it out. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We appreciate everybody who tuned in for the live stream tonight, Tuesday night at 8:30. We do it every week at 8:30 p.m. at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Appreciate everybody who listens to the podcast through the week. If you enjoy the podcast, you want to be part of it as it happens live, you want to be like, Tony Tennyson and RJ Seaman and Charles Tomarello. You got a question there. I didn't even get to your question. I apologize, man. We'll get to you next time. And PittFan234 and all the people you hear every week asking the questions and getting in on the conversation. If you want to get in on the conversation, you can go to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com every Tuesday night at 8:30. We are live. And then when some big news happens, we tend to we'll do a little live stream those nights too, just to talk about it and get some reaction to it as well. And then, Saturday mornings, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., the Panthers Insider Show on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan. We'll be talking lots of Pitt sports. It's like this podcast on 93.7 The Fan. So lots of Pitt content for you all day, every day, Panther-Lair.com, and all of our other places like on Twitter and YouTube and whatnot. But the mothership, though, is Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So make sure you go check out homefieldapparel.com. Thanks everybody for tuning in on the podcast tonight, on the live stream. Thanks for listening to the podcast through the week. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll talk to you Saturday morning for the Panthers Insider Show, and then we'll be back on Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com for the next Panther-Lair weekly show. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.